How do you vote? Say yes. Welcome back to Progressive Soup. I'm David Stevenson. Merrick Alpert is our guest tonight. Merrick is a Democratic Party candidate, candidate for United States Senate in Connecticut. Shifting a little bit in the healthcare discussion, what are your thoughts about Sustanet in Connecticut, which we just passed?
Yeah, you know, I think that one of the things that I'm rapidly coming up to speed on is as I see how much of the budget is being spent in Connecticut on healthcare-related issues. I was sitting with a state rep the other day going through some of the numbers, and we're now looking at roughly a third of the dollars that we're spending in the state are in some way connected with healthcare. If you look at what's going on systemically out there for us, we're now projecting budget shortfalls, which will be roughly a quarter to a third of the entire budget over the next few years.
Yes.
Not sustainable. Absolutely not sustainable. And I think that what we have to be doing is figuring out how do we provide a basic package of services and support to people, but at the same time, how do we control the cost? Increasing taxes on an ongoing basis is not realistic. It is simply not realistic, no matter which program, whether we're talking about healthcare or anything else. The only way we're going to get ourselves out of this is to grow our way out of this. And we've got to grow private sector jobs. It's the only way we can provide for meaningful programs. It's something I focus on every day. And to be very candid with you, when I talk with folks who are in the legislature, be they at the federal level, be they at the state level, they'll always talk about which programs they want to increase, which programs they want to cut. They'll talk about taxes. But virtually none of these people can have a substantive conversation with you about exactly what they're going to do to grow jobs. And the reason for that is because these are career politicians. They haven't ever had to build a company. I always say that most of these people have never had a private sector job, let alone created one. And if you haven't sweated payroll, if you haven't really focused on job creation at a small business, I think, quite frankly, you're not particularly capable of dealing with these problems. I think during the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, we should be very, very, very hesitant to have someone in power who never had a private sector job. Because at the end of the day, whether we're talking about providing for healthcare programs in Connecticut or educational programs in Connecticut or infrastructure programs in Connecticut, all of these programs have to be paid for through the creation of private sector jobs and then a rational, logical, sustainable taxing structure on those companies. It scares me that we have become known, as you know, we've become known as an anti-business state. We've become known as an anti-job state. And for us to continue to lose population, to lose young people, not to focus on job creation, that's not sustainable.
Differentiate between, when we talk about jobs, we can talk about big box stores, larger corporations in the state, and we could talk about small business. Do you differentiate, and how would you differentiate between job creation in small businesses versus bringing large corporations in from elsewhere in the world?
Well, you have to distinguish between the big corporations and smaller corporations. When you really look at the facts in Connecticut are this is a state of small business, and really the growth that we're seeing is coming from small business. That's where the job creation is. When you look at the numbers, about 73% of all business in Connecticut today is small business, defined as micro business with 9 employees or less. Only 5% of Connecticut's companies today have 50 employees or more. So traditionally, you'd see a politician standing there at a ribbon cutting at some big company, and they talk about what's happening at a place like Pratt & Whitney. Those jobs are precious. Those jobs are important. But those companies are not representative of the larger number of companies in Connecticut, and they're not representative of the growth businesses in Connecticut. What we want to be doing is what you see successfully done in places like the Research Triangle in North Carolina, or the high-tech corridor in Boston, or Silicon Valley in California. Creation of high-wage, high-tech jobs directly related to intellectual property, directly related to your university systems. We have what it takes to do it, but nobody's ever set the plan out and driven it in the state of Connecticut.
What I found last year when I ran for state representative was I talked to a lot of small business owners, and what they told me straight out was that their number one concern as a small business owner was the inability or the cost of providing health insurance for their employees. And that's what separates them from a lot of larger companies who, because they're large and they have a large number of employees, have an easier time finding that health insurance for their employees, where small businesses don't. How will that play into the idea of healthcare reform on a national level?
Well, you desperately need some form of pooling arrangement. You desperately need to get economy of scale. The challenge for small business, and I know from having successfully run them and grown them and sold them, the challenge with small business is that you're forgotten by the government. They remember you only to tax you. But otherwise, because you can't write $10,000 political action committee checks and you don't have a massive association to lobby on your behalf, when it comes to healthcare costs, when it comes to other insurance costs, when it comes to electricity costs, when it comes to all the basic costs to run a business, you really are without an advocate very often. I am of the belief that we need to start to elect people who are the advocates of small business, because if we continue to drive small business out of Connecticut, at the end of the day, it's going to be extraordinarily hard to finance programs and projects, no matter how well-meaning and how legitimate those programs are.